continuing with what we were saying, let me do one thing. Let me just show you this schematic and then I'll proceed.
Yes, please.
Let me just pause it for a moment. I'll start again. Just a moment.
Right.
Can you see this on the screen?
Yes, sir.
Purusha, Prakriti, they come together to create the Mahat, which is the mind in some sense, Ahamkara, then the Gunas. From the Gunas come the uh, Tanmatras. From the Ahamkara, from the Gunas, you have the Bhutas, the five Bhutas. And from the five Bhutas, you have the five Tanmatras. And on
It
this
is
side,
the tamas element creates the tanmatras and bhutas.
ah, yeah. There'll be debate on this because then what interpretation you give to tamas?
Because
Is it
these are the senses which they have defined: sound, touch, form, flavor, smell. These are the five senses.
so? Do you give the interpretation of being inconscient nature, or do you give the interpretation of being inertia and of being the difficult part of nature, the violent part of nature? So that depends upon how you
Hmm.
define this tamas. But this is an oversimplistic thing just to give an idea. Okay, this is how the 25 elements are there: 5, 5, 5, 5, and the rest of the 5: 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, interpretations will vary whether the manas is different from the mahat, or the mahat comes first, ahamkara comes later, or the ahamkara comes first. All of this will go on.
Hmm.
Oversimplified, this is how it is. Sankhya's oversimplified way of looking at it. I have seen some other depictions also where these gunas are put before Prakriti and then Prakriti comes. And I have seen something where from Prakriti, from the gunas, everything else comes out. So we leave it for some later time, but just for the present, just to give an idea of schematically what we are referring to.
But that's quite obvious. We can see it the other way also.
Other thing. So leaving apart those pedantic disputes, coming to our subject, the question we were looking at was how do you extricate yourself from pathology and also from normalcy? Now, here the difficulty of definition comes in. What is health? Uh, in psychoanalysis and in the Western civilization, absence of sickness is health. And sickness is what we define as sickness based upon personal and social experience and scientific observation. In the Eastern schools, uh, the definition of health is much higher. Like in Ayurveda, not only the absence of disease, but also the harmony of senses and the feeling of ananda is an intrinsic part of the definition of health. That if the senses are not harmonious, and if you are not having a feeling of ananda, even with no disease, you are still a sick man. Similarly, in the spiritual schools, it goes even stricter. They say The one who has not experienced a state of no thought or oneness with the existence is a sick man. Now, by that definition, entire humanity will go sick, definitionally speaking. So here, again, the Purusha has to be extracted not only from the pathological Prakriti, but from Prakriti itself.
True.
So the goals are very different. Goal of Sankhya and the goal of psychoanalysis will be very different. Sankhya's goal will be much higher. And what Sankhya believes to be within the reach of human nature, psychoanalysis will say is beyond the reach of human nature. So the limits of human potential are different between the two. Coming to the technique as we were discussing, the Purusha has to first keep observing the Prakriti and be free from the hold of thoughts, then the hold of emotions, then the hold of desires, and lastly the hold of Ahankara. And this is one of the most difficult, as I said, to give control of the Ahankara by giving up the doership to existence. And this would call for a conversation with existence, which to a layman and a half-informed person may even look like inviting psychosis. There is an old joke that if you pray to God, it's prayer. If you talk to God, it's prayer. If God talks back to you, it's schizophrenia. Now, are we not leading somebody in this direction? And obviously not. It's a very different kind of thing. We are looking at a person with a very healthy ego moving into this conversation with existence. We are not looking at a person that disintegrating ego where the id is going out of control, projecting itself out. That kind of a situation, very different situation. So here, the Ahankara then remains only a functional Ahankara, not a becoming Ahankara. Who are very different. A functional Ahankara knows that I am different from this computer or this table. I am different from the next man standing to me. His property is not my property. That is functional, but I don't have anything to become. I don't have any personal desire in that sense. So that part of Ahankara drops. And a functional Ahankara, which is not a becoming Ahankara, that functional Ahankara almost autonomously functions, and it's by and large held by and aided by and guided by existence.
Basically, an awareness of I and being I
I, which is in becoming,
in becoming.
the becoming process. Becoming meaning
Becoming.
I am at place X and I want to be Y. I don't have an iPhone, I want to have an iPhone. So from a place X where I don't have an iPhone, I undergo a process of becoming and reach the point where I have the iPhone. So this in between is the process of becoming. From state A to state B, in between is the process of becoming. I don't know and I want to know, so I get knowledge. That also is a process of becoming. All this becoming ceases. Whatever has to happen without the power of a personal level craving or desire. So what happens is that there is no self-becoming in that sense. The entire system is then tuned to existence to become more or less its channel. That's the idea in the Sankhya darshan. Now that would be very radically different from what you see in psychoanalysis. One last point here of Sankhya is very clear about the overcoming of tamas, rajas, increasing the satvikta, and then going into a state of pure purusha, the gunatit sthiti, which is above all the gunas, the gunatit condition of pure observation. Now we see the same thing in recent times in Krishnamurti, who calls it a choiceless self-awareness. And it's called in by many different names in different schools. Uh, Sankhya does not have any inhibitions in asking us to deploy techniques of control, of lifestyle, of moral well-being, and so on to reduce tamas, optimize rajas, and enhance sattva. Psychoanalysis is defeated here. Psychoanalysis traditionally has been very hesitant in taking on id directly, out of the fear that anything moralistic, anything anti-id will get into the service of repression and undo our efforts. Uh, in that sense, psychoanalysis finds itself very hesitant to be on the side of superego and be against id. Whereas in Sankhya, he's very clear that he is on the side of superego and he's not on the side of id.
Probably all these years while I have been a student of psychoanalysis, I thought it the other way that psychoanalysis, from the school of psychology perspective, is the only school which talks about, which gives validation to id in a certain way.
Correct. Correct. That's what.
As compared to
Yeah.
as
So
compared to rest of the schools and
absolutely.
rest of the social moral setups.
Exactly. That's what I was saying. Psychoanalysis finds it very difficult to oppose id and be
Right,
on the side of superego. Right?
right,
Because of
right.
the reasons it can help in repression, which will undo the core work of psychoanalysis.
True.
And the evolution of psychoanalysis, the belief of psychoanalysis, all of this makes it difficult for it to be on the side of superego and against it. Now, contrary to this, Sankhya is very clear.
Nonsense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Contrary to this, Sankhya is very clear of siding with the superego to some extent and being against it to some extent. He does not hesitate to put in morality, in lifestyle, in thought and conduct in order to achieve the goals of reducing the id, optimizing the rajas, and enhancing the sattva, so that finally you can go to the gunatit condition of pure observer. Where
But
you can,
isn't it, I have a question here that in Sankhya, isn't it a stepwise journey? Sankhya is talking about much more refined individuals,
right,
while psychoanalysis is talking about a more pathological individuals where that is valid, and gradually once they become refined humans, this is how the goal, it is goal oriented. So it's in between processes and stages are also there. We, if we see Sankhya's main ultimate goal and psychoanalysis ultimate goal, there is the difference. But if we include that the basic pathologies have to be removed, for which it has to be taken out, and then it goes, it becomes a psychoanalysis becomes a transitionary phase
correct,
towards the Sankhya.
right. So for many individuals, this may actually be the path that they would go through psychoanalysis and then they would go into the more higher esoteric, refined elements of Sankhya. And Sankhya would be open to the other route also. That somebody not going through this route, but going through that moralistic route.
Like in Jain Dharma.
Yeah, or in the Ashtanga Yoga.
Yeah.
Yam Niyam. Right? So when you talk of that Yam Niyam, the stepwise thing, the initial thing is building up the morality, the traditional, strengthening the morality.
Standards.
Yeah.
Yes,
So in
yes.
our language, we'll say strengthening the superego. So,
Absolutely.
so those differences apart, the goals of pathology, the goals of health, the goals of happiness, and then the goal of enlightenment, which is different. That is how there is one way to compare and contrast Sankhya and psychoanalysis.
Coming to your model heat, sir, how would you see it relating to Sankhya in any chance, in any case?
There are certain common things. generically speaking. The common things are this. Heat also is in a way, essential theory of everything. It is, it has its own take on ontology. It has its own take on teleology. It uses elemental approach to analysis, just as Sankhya uses 25 elements. Right? Heat uses a larger number of elementals, but still it's the theory of trying to explain a
Elementals.
system in terms of elementals. It is not a process theory, it's an elemental theory. And it is based upon open structuralism. Now, Sankhya also can be taken in one way to be based upon open structuralism. That the Purusha has free will and Prakriti has laws. So there is free will and determinism. And the free will lead to openness and the determinism will lead to structure. So in
Mm.
that sense, it can be thought of. I am not saying this is the only way to think about it, but one way to think about it can be it's into the realm of open structuralism, philosophically speaking. All those characteristics are shared by Heat and Sankhya both. Now, where they differ is this. Sankhya talks about manas, but he does not go in details like the tantrics do in terms of ichha, chakra, prana, and bhava. So,
Mm.
when you talk of manas, one way to talk of manas is to talk about it wholesale.
Mm.
That it is the center of desires, it is the center of ABC. Second is to go into mechanics of it, how the desire operates. Then the whole thing comes out that this manas is not one desire but many desires. And then it comes out that these desires are decentralized at different locations. And then the chakra concept comes in. So this word
Mm.
manas gets deconstructed in terms of the entire chakra system. And once you have the chakras, you have to have ichha. That ichha has to activate and deactivate chakras. And in order to
What is this ichha? Is this ichha the desire or is this ichha the initiating command?
uh,
What it is?
it is the desire, but the desire itself has to activate and deactivate. Now, this takes us to the activation and deactivation of desire. That how does it happen? So there is a variety of desires. Some desires will be activated and deactivated by biological elements.
Mm.
You go hungry and the glucose goes low, a desire will activate. Some desires will activate by the clock. You have a habit of doing something at 4 o'clock, that desire activates by clock. Some desires will activate by karma. Some desires will activate by self journey. Some desires will activate by free will. Some desires will activate by what you see in the environment. Some desires will activate by people around you. So this takes us into activation and deactivation of desire. But where heat is different is it deconstructs this manas into this operating system of uh, chakras.
Chakras.
Right? Behind that is desire. Behind that are is self-jnani and
Pranas.
karma, and behind that is the psychic. And on the front of it is affinity and prana. So this mechanics of it gets into the construction of the system.
Construction.
The heat is also different because it brings in, apart from the whole chakra system, it brings in Freud and Jung in structural terms. It also is different because it introduces certain elementals which are not there in Sankhya, because it takes elementals partly from Western philosophy, from Immanuel Kant, and adds to it more elementals of its own. So we are taking something from yoga, something from Tantra, something from Sri Aurobindo, something from the West, something from Immanuel Kant, and we are adding something to all of it to create heat. So, This, therefore, is how heat is different. Right? That it is similar in some ways, different in other ways, and it is a work in progress. And in future, it will become more comprehensible, complete itself. But it is definitely a kind of a school which has the potential to become a much more comprehensive school. I have not said it will become a darshan, not that it does not have the potential, but I have not done something in that context. But definitely it will become a more comprehensive school.
Indeed. So, how has been the application of heat in practice?
Patients have been far ahead of practitioners and regulatory bodies. So patients have taken to holistic healing, they have taken to heat in a much better way without using the word or without using the terms. Uh,
True.
Holistic healing, spirituality, energy healing, which are parts of heat, they are being used by patients. Few holistic healing practitioners also are using it. My belief is once we empirically prove something, and this can happen in two ways. Either we first do an empirical proving and then develop tools, or first we develop tools, use it, prove something, and then go for empirical proving. My feeling is tools probably will be the first to go. So next year we'll be developing tools and then testing them out, and this will help us to really go in for a more empirical testing of the system. Should have happened this year, but somehow I was too lazy. Next year, I think something will move and I will give consent.
We're waiting for this beautiful concept to be spread around. So, and how will the evolution of heat be? How do you see it?
Uh, First will be the empirical proving. Second will be development of the tools. Third will possibly be getting in touch with reincarnation or parapsychology. Fourth will be include more of society, culture, and history. Fifth will be getting in touch with the body. Sixth will be getting in touch with uh, evolution and then larger nature. And if everything goes
Oh,
on, then there is a potential for it to become a far more comprehensive school, and it will offer definitely undergo a lot of changes. An enterprise of this scale cannot end at the finishing stage as it was in the starting stage. So undoubtedly it will undergo radical changes. Not only changes, but even radical changes at some points in time. But uh, I have not used it to do jumps into psychology or philosophy or mysticism. For example, if you look at Osho or if you look at Pandurang Shastri, uh, they were able to do those uh, leaps from what is known into the grand ideas
oh,
of spirituality and mysticism. I have by and large held back myself. Not that I am not capable of it, but somehow something has held me back. That's
mhm.
something when it releases me, probably I will give consent and do something.
Out of the way, rare, I would say, to experience a conversation of this type. On another subject, see you all again. Keep journeying. Namaste.